Welcome, everyone, to the Avive podcast. I'm JF Benoit. I'm your host. I'm the best-selling author of Addicted to the Monkey Mind, Change the Programming That Sabotages Your Life, along with Avive and Adventure in Belonging. And I'm so glad that you're here, that you're tuning in with us today. Today, I just want to emphasize that the mission, one of the primary mission of Avive is to actually learn the importance of prioritizing connection, meaning that the way we are raised is sort of an obsessive way to overfocus on the behavior, overfocus on our achievements in life, overfocus on our goals that we're trying to reach. And we learn early on what we called false belonging habits. Those are habits of performance, they're habits of self-neglect. We might be pushing love away. We might just be stuck in anxiety. We might be stuck in self-doubt and repressing our feelings. So all these dynamics happen because ultimately we learn to prioritize that we need to be better or fix or change ourselves in some way in order to belong. And that's really detrimental to our lives to live that way. A lot of us are not sort of like completely conscious that that's what we do, but the more we put emphasis on learning about our behaviors and learning how we are being reactive in life, then the more we get to be conscious that this dynamic is very well alive in our lives. So today I've invited Desiree. Desiree and I have known each other for 20 years. I'm really excited to have her with us today. And one of the main things that I think is precious about our relationships is a little bit how it started, Desiree, right? We met around, I think at the time we were talking about opening up a center, and we had just this thing in common of really helping other people. So welcome to the Avive podcast. Thank you for being with us today. I'm excited that you'll help us sort of flesh this Avive thing out a little more.
Thank you, Francois, for having me. It was such a blessing in my life to meet you and your beautiful wife, Joyce, back that 20 years ago, because I think we had the makings for a deep and personal, deep relationship with each other, meaningful relationship. And it kind of started from the time we met. And I think part of that was we were both deep people, you know what I mean? We like to go underground of the shadow and the light and, bring out the best of each other. And so I'm very grateful to be a part of your life. And I'm thinking about deep, meaningful relationships and, what makes that happen? What can you say about that? What in your experience brings that to you in your life?
Well, the first thing, that I see is that it takes courage to establish a depth of connection with someone. And unfortunately, we're very conditioned to sort of say things like, I'm fine, right? When someone asks you, well, how are you doing today? And that actually is just, it's so painful to actually answer in that way, because underneath that, what we're not aware of for a lot of the times is that there's something going on, but we fear rejection, right? So we fear like, oh, if I tell them exactly what's going on, or we fear that there could be all sorts of scenarios we're afraid of, right? The person might be pitying us or start giving us advice or, So there's definitely, it's so bizarre because I see people and expressing a deep desire for deep intimacy in our relationship, for real connection. And at the same time, there's this dreading like, oh, can I really do this? Can I really tell the person how I'm really feeling right now?
It seems like you have to have a bit of trust. Does that include trusting yourself, or what does it take inside yourself to really be able to be like totally authentic with how you feel, and who would that be appropriate for?
Yeah, trust. Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I mean, trust is the key. And what you just pointed at and alluded at is that we don't have that safety within ourselves. And so that's where it needs to start, right? Because when I'm not in tune with my own emotions, with what's really happening with me, to give you an example, let's say a partner is really frustrated because the other partner just keeps working long hours, right? And so they come home and they have this irritation, and a lot of people will be sort of aligned with that irritation, but they won't be really necessarily connected to what's underneath that irritation, right? So for most people, if they were allowed to be in a safe space and to just talk about their frustration and the person would just listen, at some point what they would notice is underneath there's this real like sadness that exists there because they feel alone, right? They are craving the connection with their partner. They miss their partner. And it's like, can be challenging for most people to create enough safety to start touching, oh yeah, what's really happening is not so much that I'm irritated that my partner's working too much. It's that I feel really alone. And then oftentimes there's a fear to express that real emotion that's underneath. And so we have to learn that we can actually feel all kinds of feelings and that those feelings are welcome. They're important to pay attention to, right? And so when we learn to do that, I know for me, I have a practice that oftentimes with my partner, I'll ask for a pause or I'll ask for time and I'll go sit. Right? And then I start breathing and I look deeper. I know there's something deeper. Usually the surface emotion that rises up is an emotion that's related to a story I'm telling myself, right? Like the story of it's irritating, it's my partner's fault because they're working too much. And so it's actually easy to follow those stories, but those stories are blame, they're about reaction, and they don't lead us to connection, right? So this ability to go sit and actually breathe and ask myself, what's deeper than that, right? What's deeper? And the more I develop this ability to first connect with, oh, you know what? That's really true. I feel alone and I really miss my partner. And I fear that this is going to go on forever, right? That I won't have that connection.
Yes. So I'm hearing that, it's fear, but it's also lack of understanding inside yourself of what the real emotion is that you're feeling. You may come across as irritated and short with your partner. And I know I've done that and had it done to me. And I know people, it seems to be a way sometimes people interact. But it sounds like what you're saying is they may not be in touch with what is really bothering them. So when you take that time out to pause, you're actually getting in touch with the real feeling of feeling like you miss your partner and you're lonely. So that's huge, right? So then what happens?
Well, even getting to that stage is pretty. It requires a lot of dedication and focus, meaning like for most people, even just pausing, right? Just like when they're about to react and saying to oneself, oh, wait a minute. And one of the things that I've learned that's been the most efficient in my life to do that is to actually, in the moment, see where this is heading. Like when I'm about to react, if you pause for a second and you think of yourself saying to your partner, hey, look, I'm really tired of you working all the time, right? So immediately, like I can feel it, like in my body, right? This, like how is this going to go if I say something like that, if I react? So I've been really aware that when we're able to have a visceral experience in our emotional body of where the reaction's going to lead us. Does that make sense? Like, where is it heading? And we have so many experiences from the past that we already know, right? We've already reacted before hundreds of ways. And that's the indication. That's where it puts us back in a place of choice. That's what's so beautiful, right? So the first most, hardiest, thing to do is to pause this, but the motivator becomes connection over disconnection, right? And so that's the place to start. Now, when I go sit by myself, I meet the second challenge, which is now I have to be willing to experience uncomfortable feelings, right? And so, meaning that I'm not going to just stay with my irritation. I'm going to check in with myself and saying, what's deeper than that? What's deeper than just, the stimulus or the situation or the person, this belief that we have in life of thinking that, our experiences is caused by the other person, right? It's like life is not cause and effect. It's actually how I perceive life that gives me my experience, right? So then as I sit in that deeper emotion, I have to be willing to experience this loneliness. Mm-hmm. And I would say, before I can even move to the next step that you asked me, which is what do I do next? It's really important to slow down enough to recognize that this is a big deal for us to sit in that discomfort of, yeah, that's really true. The emotional body is like almost like a child in a way that needs our attention. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be told what to do. We don't need to start ruminating on how to fix the situation or change it. It's like saying to oneself, one of my favorite thing I tell myself, which sounds really crazy and strange, Desiree, but I'll say to myself, I won't abandon you. I know this is uncomfortable right now, and I'm going to stick with you right now in this experience. Let's just let this experience be here, right? So it's pretty phenomenal to do this process. Now, easier said than done, that's for sure.
But if your partner isn't quite doing the same, I mean, you're doing the pause, but they aren't, and you're both in reaction. So
Yeah.
you're pausing, but I guess that makes them pause as well.
Well, that's the thing. But here's the thing. Most of us, in an intimate relationship, we don't realize that creating security, okay, is it's so crucial. And one way that we can do that when we pause is to say to our partner, look, I need to take a minute here. I'm sensing a lot of anxiety in my body, and I need to take a pause. I'll come back, right? So just the ability to say that, it's freeing. And as your partner will go, oh, okay, she's not, or they're not ignoring me here, right? They're realizing that there's a lot of anxiety and they're taking a pause, right? Now, ultimately, once we develop that skill, okay, the beauty of this is we can come back and report back to our partner the deeper feeling that was going on. So, meaning now I can come back and say, I noticed that first I wanted to tell you that you're working too much, but when I went deeper, I just realized that I feel really alone. And now talking about creating a meaningful connection, because the other person, it's going to be very rare the other person can react to that, right? Because now it's like I'm reporting, right, a deeper truth about me that's vulnerable, that is true, that is honest. And now my partner has a chance to this is going towards connection now. It's no longer this debate that we're going to have because I want to prove to you that I'm right, that you are working too much,
Right. And I get it in intimate relationships, because ideally in an intimate partnership, you have some of that safety and trust worked out. But how does that really work to with your children, for example? I mean, I know it's a challenge for me to deal with teenagers, because sometimes you just don't understand where they are, and they need, and often they come at you with anger, or it might be irritation or anger, or they just push away because um, something's going on in there. So how do you relate it to other members that you're of the maybe of your family, and then I could see how this could go into the like into your work environment too. But there's different levels, it seems. Can you tell me more about that and how that works with your
Yeah,
kids?
with
Other
teenagers, one of the things that's tricky is that it's common, for us to get lost in in the topic of the conversation, or get lost in over focus on the behavior, right? So with teenagers is, did you do your homework? And it's like, the answer is like, no, whatever. And so now we're like over focus on, well, it's important to do your homework, right? And it's like, we don't realize that focus of the behavior and what we're sending as a message is, hey, that behavior of not doing your homework needs to change. Now, if you stop for a second and you ask yourself, what is the emotional experience of my teenager when I say that? Right? Regardless of for them, it's a correction. For them, and the message underneath that correction is, you'll be lovable or you'll be likable if you perform in the way that I'm asking you to perform, right? So there's an awareness to carry that connection means that I'm interested in my teenager's experience. I want to know what's happening with them, right? So if they're like just on their phone, for example, I might say, hey, like what are you texting with someone, or what are you doing? And then they tell you, well, yeah, I'm texting Joe, or I'm whatever it is they're doing. And in that moment, it's being curious and being excited to know about their world, and saying, oh, what's going on with your friend? And then you engage in, as long as it's true, right? That you're not just asking random questions that are not genuine. You want to be genuine, right? This is the beginning of shifting from over focusing on the behavior, and now start shifting the focus on the connection. Just that alone will create a radically different dynamic. Now, if we're talking about the homework, you still want to have discernment and be able to come back to what we're asking the teenager to do, right? But the thing is, if the teenager is pushing against us, we want to then focus on, I'm noticing right now that you seem to be like pushing, right, against me here. I just want to like check in with you. Are you doing okay? Right? And genuinely being, again, interested in what experience are they going through.
So I hear what you're saying, but it seems kind of complicated, because as a parent, you care, you're wanting to impart that you care about what they do and what they don't do. And there are certain expectations that you have about their behavior. And to put all that aside seems really hard and scary, because then will they actually succeed? Because the parent probably goes, well, are they going to fail school? Because if I don't push to make sure they do what they're supposed to, how do you do that and stay connected to the child? It sounds like you're actually teaching them that skill of tuning into themselves and listening, and being honest about how they really feel and why they aren't doing their homework, or what's behind it, the behavior, right?
Right.
Or explain
Right.
more.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. What we don't realize is we're gonna save a lot of time if we actually focus on the connection first. We're gonna save so much time, right?
Got it.
So what do I mean by that? When we focus on the behavior, or I would say over focus on the behavior, we already know the pushback that we're going to get. And do we get collaboration when we do that? Is our teenager more likely to follow our request here? Or, when we say things like, well, you know how important your homework is, what response do we get? The
Resistance.
majority, right?
Yeah.
right? They'll get more distant from you. That's exactly what they'll do, right? So we have it backwards. We're sort of thinking that if we connect, right? Or oftentimes we just don't have sort of like an initial response to go towards connection because we want our kids to succeed in life, and that's the goal that's dominating us. It's like they can't, we don't want them to fail. We want them to be successful. So that makes sense, right? The way we're going about it, though, is very similar to the way we were raised, right? So we were told all these things that we tell our teenagers, right? Now, think of it this way. Let's take an example where, let's say, the kid kind of refuses to listen to you about how they keep hanging out with a kid, right? That is like a bad influence for them, right? So that's very common. And so imagine, instead of starting with the agenda of like, you got to stop seeing that friend, and that's not a friend, and he's going to lead you into trouble or whatever. So imagine that instead, you begin the connection by saying, hey, what do you like about this friend? And then they can sort of like tell you about it, and you say, oh, so you really like this aspect, and you like this, and you get interested, right, in really, really knowing, why is this connection with this person that is not a good influence? Why is that important? Until you will generally start feeling like they're being real with you. They're telling you, and it's surprising, but most teenagers, when they have an opportunity to really talk about what they care about, they'll just tell you. They'll just go ahead and really tell you. And so at some point in the conversation, it's treating them like real questions that lead them to create their own conclusion. So you might say, wow, I see that you're really excited about this person and the things that you're doing together. And have you considered, when you do this particular thing with them, are you aware of what the consequences might be, or what might be happening, to you? Like, in what way? It's kind of like, in what way are you perhaps putting yourself in danger or whatever? But it's phrasing it in a way that they're going to come up with the very thing that you see. They're going to end up seeing it themselves, but through their own lens. Instead of you telling them that the relationship is dangerous, you help them see by them telling you that the relationship is dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yes. However, I'm thinking like an example of, a bad influence could be they take drugs, or they take drugs, and that's a big scary thing for the parents, right?
Right.
And, obviously a conversation that they're having, and sex is the other part of it. Are they having, do you give them sex education? So there's all these, like, what I'm hearing from you is, with kids, you're going to be developing that closeness and keeping that relationships as open and authentic as possible, so that when they do grow up, they make better decisions, but they will probably still make mistakes. So how do you, as a working parent, with a full-time job and, all the responsibilities that go with that, and your concern is keeping your child safe. I mean, how do you keep that in place when they make a poor decision, and they have, maybe they get pregnant, or they, end up taking drugs, and you find out, what do you do? I mean, how do can you always prevent it by having connection, or not?
Well, I'm not sure that it's the connection. Well, ultimately, the connection is the best prevention, but I don't want to put that as, like a belief for people to actually, buy into right now. More into like, this is something that we have to experience ourselves, right? So, but here's the thing that you're pointing out that's really important, is creating connection does not mean that I abandon discernment as a parent. It doesn't mean that I don't have boundaries as a parent. The opposite. What we're saying is, before I put in the boundary, before I put in the real solid expectation that my kid's not going to do drug, I then connect with them first. And this is where the buy-in will come in, right? So let's say that's the example of that friend that we're concerned that that friend uses a lot of drugs. And then, so we connect, we say what's exciting you about this relationship. They tell you all this. And then you say at some point, so my understanding is that person, spends a lot of time smoking marijuana, let's say. And then they could say, yeah. And then you could say, so what is that like for you, right, to be with a person that's smoking a lot of marijuana? And how do you feel like when you're around someone who's smoking a lot of weed, right? And so slowly what we're doing is bringing them aware, right, of experiences that they're not aware of, because they're just focusing on the joy or the excitement that they have about that relationship, but they're not really noticing all the things that could lead, right, or lead to potential harm to themselves. They don't really focus on that. So I think the boundary still comes. And that's for sure. As parents, it's to keep our kids safe. We have to lay down those boundaries for sure. What I'm suggesting, though, is before you lay down the boundary, if you establish connection with them, the likelihood of them understanding the boundary and being willing to follow it will go much higher. It'll be exponential in the way that they'll be more willing.
I see. I get it. I'm seeing that by being more intimately connected to yourself, being aware of how you're feeling, because you might feel really scared. That's why you're wanting to, say, don't do this, don't do that. It's dangerous. Instead, you're drawing them out, if I'm understanding correctly, to share with you what is attracting them to that person and how do they feel when they're around that person, and are they, you know, do they feel like it's something they want to do, and why would they? Are they just curious, and that kind of thing? So it's a big job. I hear that for parents, and then developing these deep relationships starts with yourself. Then you have a partner, which sounds like the fast track to personal growth to me, having a partner, right? And then having kids, they become your gurus, I've heard. So I guess how do you take this out into, let's say I've had friends, that talk to me about their relationships, and, they're both so busy, they miss the intimacy. Maybe, they used to cuddle more and touch a lot. And what happens? I mean, I'm seeing a theme here, but how do you bring that affection? So affection's like a big thing with kids too, right?
Yeah.
Being touched and being, snuggled, and, healthy affection. Um, so how do you bring that, because I can see this going from your family then out into the world, with your coworkers and with friends and so forth. How do you get what you need when one person has a bigger need than you have for
Hmm.
affection or something like that?
Well, the more I delve into creating those deep, meaningful connection with my own children, with my partner, with my colleagues at work, one of the things that's really, really clear is that it takes courage. So
Mm-hmm.
making those connections here is not just, it's like it's a positive affirmation. It's just like, yeah, I'm just going to start asking question. No, it doesn't work that way, because if we're not being genuine, then it's not going to go well. It really isn't. So there's an aspect of learning to create this sense of safety with ourselves around our deeper emotions, right? Because what I know for sure after 20 years of being in the mental health and running an addiction treatment center and doing all this work is that at the bottom of it, there's something really clear, is that our initial reaction is never what we're truly feeling. So there's initial emotion that show up in the relationship, like say with our kids, it'll be irritation that they're not doing what they're supposed to with the husband or the partner that works too much, or, the colleague that doesn't pull their weight or whatever it is. But this initial irritation or the emotion that we're having, it's about the story we tell ourselves, right? But that event has an impact on us. And so when we begin to want to create those deep, meaningful connection, we have to first create it with ourselves. And there's no greater way of saying this. It really is, that's one of the reasons why we don't create and we don't have enough courage to create it with other people, is first we have to be honest with ourselves. The truth, right? Like what we said earlier with my partner, it's not that the partner works extra hours that really sort of creates this distress in the body. It's really the fact that I'm lonely. I miss them, right? So the same thing with the children. It's like, I want to be a good parent. Like, oh gosh, I feel like maybe I failed them if they're hanging out with someone who does drugs. Oh, ouch, right? And if my colleague at work doesn't, do their share of the work, then I just feel obligated. Like I'm the one who's supposed to, pick up the slack and everything, and I'm not enough if I don't, So all of those are deeper feelings that are happening. And connection is created when we are honest with ourselves about those deeper emotions. And we don't try to run from them. We don't try to hide them. And we're willing to come back to the conversation and say, hey, I got really scared there, right? Because you're working a lot and I feel alone. Or even with our kids, we could say honestly our own feelings and say, as we connect with them, we might say, I noticed that sometimes I feel I have this feeling, this distress feeling in the pit of my stomach, that it's like that you'll lose your way. Right. And it's just like, and I'm scared that I'm not doing my job. Right. So
yeah, I hear you.
It comes back to this deep honesty with our own self and then being able to communicate that with others.
So it sounds like what's really wonderful about that is we have a lot of power to change ourselves. And when we change ourselves and do what you're suggesting here, to really get in touch with how we really feel, that could be transforming, could have a ripple effect on our whole family. And that ripple effect can extend out into the world in
It's
a big way.
amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, Desiree, it's really changed my life. And I notice of how it eliminated arguments now with my partner. There's no more debate because the initial reaction is about being right. It's defensive. It's trying to defend the deeper emotion that is actually the real thing that's going on, And so, I mean, it saves so much time and arguments and disconnection and turmoil. Oh my gosh, it's life-giving, And it is scary because we're not used to be even that connected to ourselves, right? To know that we have fears that we don't belong. We have fears that we're, I call it like the okayness, like of myself. It's like when we're experiencing distress, that's really what's happening, is that initially there's just this idea that I know what the issue is about, but underneath is that at the nervous system level, my okayness appears to be in question, right? It's like, oh, if my partner works too hard, does that mean that I'm not important? Like if my kids doesn't follow my instruction, does that mean I'm a bad parent? And, it's so strange because it's not something that is sort of analytical, like meaning we don't think out loud those thoughts. And yet emotionally, when we tap into it, that's what we come out with, right? We can really identify and see that there's a deeper fear, and it's related to belonging. It's related to our sense of self appears to be put in question,
I hear you. It sounds like if people take Avive Lavi, do the program with you, actually, immerse themselves in really being courageous and trusting that they will, when they heal themselves in that way and they're able to, because it doesn't sound like it's a perfect, you're going to be perfect. However, you'll probably, I guess they call it emotional intelligence,
Hmm.
be able to respond in more appropriate ways, take that pause when you need to, when you feel yourself getting really riled up, and reach for the connection again with whoever it is. If it's your partner, your child, your coworker, somebody, maybe even a friend that you get upset with. It sounds like this work on yourself is the key to
Yeah.
actually
And
change. Yeah.
it's really a blessing to begin to understand that our discomfort, right, this anxiety that lives in our body, like you said, carries an incredible intelligence. And what it's pointing out to is really it's a radar that's looking to see if we belong. And it's always been there. And unfortunately, when we grew up, what happened is we were sort of, the environment around us reaffirmed that yes, we need to be afraid because if you don't get the good grades, then you don't belong. Or it's epidemic in our society. And unfortunately, all of that is a lie, right? It's like my ability to belong does not require any of us to change ourselves or fix ourselves, right? So
Does it
if
require you to be less critical too?
well, the less critical comes from being more connected with our emotional body.
Gotcha.
That's the one thing that is the most challenging because you could tell yourself positive affirmation, right? Or trying to sort of overcompensate what you're thinking. But the thing is that this inner critic is so loud that it's really difficult to manage it on on an argument or debate level or trying to say to yourself, well, no, I'm not those things when that voice keeps coming back. Deeper than that, the voice is actually pointing out to a deeper emotion, and that emotion is some form of feeling inadequate. And we need to verify whether that's true or not, right? Does my kid not behaving in the way that I want them to behave, does that really define me as a parent? Right? And when we ask that, obviously we can see that that makes no sense, right? Does my partner overworking, does it define my lovability? It makes no sense. It really doesn't. It's like if you went to a court of law and said, Your Honor, we're going to prove that she's not lovable because the partner works too much. It's like the judge would go, sorry, that doesn't hold water.
Where does
So
that come from? That feeling of not belonging, and not feeling like you're good enough and all of that. Where does that originate from? I mean, does everybody have that
I
around?
don't know one single person that doesn't have that. I mean, you'd have to be a very, very advanced conscious person not to have that. Now, it doesn't mean that we have it in all areas of our lives. A lot of us are very successful. We function super well. When you look at close relationship, though, it's the most common place that you will find that this really truly exists. There's a reason why more than 50% of the couples are divorced, right? And it's because of that. It's because underneath all of these attempt to create intimacy lies this underlying fear of inadequacy, this fear of belonging. And it's because we were constantly treated that way, right? It started with good intention, meaning when we were raised and we're told not to put the finger in the electrical outlet, that's to help us survive. But then eventually when the comment becomes, you're not going to wear that to school, are you? Now it starts to be about shaping us to believe that there's a particular way to behave in order to belong. And it's very conditional. It's not like, oh, like I see that you want to wear this and it's not appropriate, but you know what? I see your passion, I connect with you, and then we talk about the possible, side effect of dressing up that way, right? So how other people might perceive you, how might you be treated. And so, but that didn't happen to us. We weren't ask how we felt. We were told to be and behave in a particular way. And it creates a dysregulated nervous system. And then unfortunately, we adopt a way of thinking that's very similar to what we received growing up. And it's not so much that it's in the past, right, that it happened. It's much more that this is what we keep repeating to ourselves. So, yeah.
It sounds like a survival mechanism of some sort. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Very much so. There's in what's really weird is that in the physical body, right, this anxiety that's created around this fear of being rejected and not belonging or not being okay, there's an experience of it that's very similar to physical threat. And it's very strange because our life is not in danger, but in some way, emotionally, being rejected really feels like that. It feels like life or death. And I think that's why it's challenging for us to learn to attune to our emotional body, because the anxiety seems so intense, to deal with.
And it's hard to receive that. I had an experience recently where I had somebody who was going to visit my network. Have a business, and he couldn't stop talking. He kept talking at me.
Yep.
And you know what I mean?
Yep.
So, I just would reassure him and let him know he could come. And then he, wrote me and said he couldn't come. And then he called me like 5 or 6 times, and I didn't have time to respond back. But the urgency, it was like there was nothing urgent. But to him, it was like if I didn't respond right then. So with a person like that who's it's very hard to stay connected. I was very annoyed. My reaction was like, God, what is wrong with you? But I didn't tell him I was. Uh, I just thought, well, you can call me once, and I am going to call you back.
Right.
When I have a moment. But that fear, I could feel the anxiety. So when I tuned in to myself, uh, I found that I felt. Uh, I felt his anxiety. I was able to feel my annoyance, and below that was I was disconnecting from him.
Mhm.
So it wasn't fear. It was more like it was judgmental. Let me put it that way.
Well,
I was critical of him being so, but then I softened and was realizing how much fear he had. Um,
yeah. And that's the gift of emotional attunement. The better we are with ourselves, the more we can actually pick it up from other people as well. And it's, you have to be careful. It's not your responsibility to manage that person's anxiety. But here's the thing, when we tune into each other, right? And we're like aware of the anxiety that might be going, you could simply provide a reassurance, right? That says, hey, I just want you to know that I'm totally good. It's okay, right? That our meeting didn't happen. And it's like that provides sort of like a real communication, as long as it has to be honest, right? That
yeah.
it's based on compassion, right? It's based on, and I'm not talking about sort of trying to rescue him. That's not healthy, right?
No,
But
communicate something, which I did. I did an email communication because he emailed me, but then he started calling and calling and calling, and then he said thank you after the email. So I guess I was, but when I did respond to him, I let him know that it's okay. You need to understand that a time will come when you. So I tried to reassure him and tell him what the scope of the network was about, and that
right,
he had to represent himself. I'm not his representative.
right, right.
And I think once he got it, was able to hear it, he calmed down. So
Well,
anyway,
and
yeah,
here's the thing: setting boundary goes, you know, goes so much better when we're able to establish the connection. So if you say to him, "Hey, that's not a problem that this happened," and at the same time, let me tell you, and then you lay out your boundary, right? Whatever it is you need to say. So it's again, for me, what's changed my life, and this is what really inspired me to launch Avive La Vie, is I don't think we've ever been taught the power of connection, right? That we don't see, we get irritated because he keeps calling, but we don't realize that making the connection with that person will actually be so much more efficient, right, at dealing with this person than running with the initial thought, oh, I'm annoyed and this shouldn't be happening, right? So it's kind of retraining ourselves that if we take the time to connect, right, it's amazing what will happen. We feel more comfortable in our own skin. People around us feel safer to be with us. It's an amazing thing, I tell you.
I felt better being kind.
Yeah, exactly. And then we end up being extremely kind. It's exactly true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Desiree, I want to thank you for being with me today. It's just so wonderful to interact with you in this way, and thank you for helping us kind of understand the importance of connection.
Well, thank you for the work you do. It's so powerful, Francois. I've experienced it, and it's changed my life. So I appreciate you. I love your work. I hope everyone will join and become a part of the transformation of themselves into a
Yeah,
connected.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to let all the viewers know that if you want to know more about Avive La Vie, you can come and actually be a guest on the podcast. We also offer weekend adventures. We have online groups. We're on TikTok and Facebook and all that good stuff. And everything is in the link in the description below. So thank you so much, Desiree, and we'll do that again sometime.
Sounds great.